turn on your camera, is it an external camera or is it
No,
a
it's a
regular
laptop.
one?
It's a laptop camera. Yeah.
It's a laptop camera.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So when you turn on the camera, it is not coming, is it?
No, no, no. It's not coming.
Okay, just wait. You see one gear icon which says the setting is general. A setting.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, a very, very happy Independence Day to all of you. And we welcome you to this special session on making of a equal city. Thank you all for taking time out on this special day, also a Sunday. It clearly shows how much we all love our city. Uh, the distressing image of thousands of migratory workers walking back to their homes in the first lockdown, or the pandemonium over oxygen cylinders, or the hospital beds in the second wave, are two defining events still fresh in our public memory over the last 15 months or so of COVID-19 pandemic. However, there's a silver lining to it, if we could call that. The pandemic brought to the fore how the city treats the urban poor among its residents. The huge inequities in access and availability to citizen services were accentuated by the pandemic. Clearly, the city has to be more equitable in sharing its resources among different sections of its residents. And this brings us to the question, can our cities be made equal? Or what would it take to make a city equal? Four key parameters on which experts assess the equality quotient of a city typically are governance, housing and sanitation, transportation, and citizen services. And our four panelists represent these four pillars. Allow me to introduce the panelists to you. We'll go with the lady first. Anindita Mukherjee. Anindita would be best described as an urban economist, currently a senior researcher at Center for Policy Research. Anindita anchors the research on urban land planning and housing intersections, focusing on residential vulnerabilities among the marginalized. She has almost 18 years of experience in collaborating with different sectors, partners including government, multi and bilateral agencies in the realm of access to affordable housing and basic services for urban poor, slum upgradation, issues of urban development, including land, water, and sanitation. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Shrikant Vishwanathan. Shrikant is Chief Executive Officer of Janagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy, a chartered accountant by training with stints in banking and audit profession. Shrikant's forte is his superb understanding of urban sector ecosystems. Janagraha's flagship reports, the annual survey of city systems, and on municipal finance reforms have become reference point for governments, urban planners, policy framers, and civic society. Next, I would like to introduce to you Madhav Pai. Madhav is Executive Director of WRI India Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Madhav champions creation of sustainable, financially viable infrastructure projects in India. A civil engineer by training with a master's degree in transport planning, Madhav has 20 years of experience of working on sustainable transport, urban planning and development, and urban water projects. And last but certainly not the least is Viraj Tyagi. Viraj is CEO of eGov Foundation that works on a societal mission to ensure citizens with easy, reliable access to services of local government. An active investor in startups, Viraj is passionate about the impact of a Jugalbandi of public digital platforms, policies, ecosystems in solving complex social problems at scale and speed. Prior to joining the impact sector, Viraj was an entrepreneur and corporate leader with experience in building large businesses in Europe and in India. Let me now sort of take you through the, how we are going to go about it in terms of the panel discussion. So this will help you to understand how to take the discussion forward. What we have done is we have basically divided the time which is we have at our disposal is 1 to 1.5 hours over 3 themes. The first theme is basically on from a think tank to a do tank, where we would be asking our panel members how the pandemic affected them, their organizations, and if they could share some innovative interventions during the pandemic in their sphere of activity. This will be followed by around 11:30. Would be having a poll question for audiences. Of course, timings will be slight since we started a bit late, for which I apologize. There will be some changes in the times, and the theme too would be lessons learned from the pandemic, where each of the experts would be sharing with us the lessons from their own point of view, from and how and what is the key takeaways from the pandemic, from the urban planning, urban on making the cities equal. And the final session would be how do we make it happen? How do we make cities equal? So we're already like going a bit late on time. So without much ado, I would like to invite our first panelist. I would like to start with Anindita. If you could take us through how did the pandemic treat you, and also in your sphere of activity, if you could share some interesting interventions that you had to go out and do, and if there are any takeaways from that.
Thanks, Shrito, for that introduction and and setting up the panel context. Given we have started late, I'll straight away go to the 2-3 key things that we could do as part of this pandemic response, and we feel very fortunate of being associated with such programs. The first I would like to tell you about the Jaga Mission work that you must have heard over the past 2 days many times as an example of Orissa doing a very innovative work. And one of the key things that I would like to point out here is, what is unique about Jaga Mission, that it has reinvented itself through its journey. And the program, which started with a land titling program essentially for the urban poor, has innovated itself at various stages. And so what it did, it created these ground level slum dwellers association and strengthened the network of self-help groups that Orissa already had, and brought it under the purview of Jaga Mission, where it got further strengthened in a circular manner, if I may take that analogy. And with the onset of the pandemic, given Orissa is one of the important states which sends out a large proportion of migrant workers to other states, they were poised to receive a lot of them back home in Orissa, and it started thinking early how to engage them gainfully once they are back and keep them safe. Given job loss is one of the far-reaching impacts that the pandemic has brought us to, and at the second level of the Jaga Mission reinvented itself as a city-wide slum upgrading program, which created a lot of economic opportunities, which was then plugged in through these urban wage employment initiative, which kind of plugged this loop very well, where you create a job for creating public infrastructure, which enabled integration of these urban poor neighborhoods within the city fabric. And I think that's a very, very innovative and novel way of uh, approaching the entire slum upgradation that we have seen thus far. That has been a really exciting journey, and we are, as a knowledge and implementation partner to government of Orissa, we are very fortunate to be part of this journey. Subsequently, another state who came forward and has started the journey is Punjab, and we have signed another MOU with Punjab as a knowledge partner to support their journey going forward in the realm of integrating urban core within their city fabric. One other thing that before I pass it on, Sudipta, I would like to bring to the attention is one more innovative thing. What we launched as part of this conversation series is a policy lab, and we call it laboratory because we feel it's the laboratory of exchange of ideas. Last year, we hosted four-part series on bringing back the discussion on rental housing, given the migrant exodus that you mentioned, and unfortunately we saw again in the second wave,
That's
not
right.
only in the first wave. There has been various policy triggers that got set in due to this exodus that was suddenly to the fore, to otherwise invisible section of our workforce in the cities. And while the policy move has been perfect and very timely and to the right direction, I think there is a lot to explore as we go forward, given the inherent, informality that plagues the rental housing sector. So those are the two very, very three key initiatives that we started at the time of the pandemic, and I feel that's very far-reaching impact as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you very much. Uh, can we now, interesting, so can we, so maybe taking it forward, Madhav, would you like to come in now in terms of how WRI, uh, how has the pandemic, treated the WRI?
Thanks, Sudipto. Thank you very much. And just a few. I mean, we've traditionally always called ourselves a think and do tank. We spend a lot of time hand-holding, working very closely with subnational governments, municipal authorities, and things like that. Essentially, we did three things differently in the last year. I would say one was, I think, immediately, since we have a lot of sort of mapping, geoanalytics, GIS kind of capabilities, we've help government at the ward level, at the city level, just with helping them to better understand sort of public health data. I mean, essentially to respond to the COVID crisis. And so we worked very closely with a few wards in Mumbai. We worked very closely with uh, um, the government in Delhi, just with mapping, right, and helping them better understand their COVID data. The second thing that we've been very actively engaged has been with public transport, right? So,
Uh-huh.
and there are actually two things. I mean, one was just initially helping them create SOPs, standard operating procedures, so that they could open up as soon as possible. The things, of course, us and several others sort of participated in these exercise with both the bus companies, the metro companies. The and also, sir, we helped, especially we've been actively engaged with Delhi, trying to move them to automatic fare collection. So again,
Okay.
contactless ticketing and that rollout of that platform. Uh, so that's the other thing. And then finally, I mean, I think we are also now trying to develop some technology, AI driven technology, to be able to count, uh, basically count pedestrians or count people from CCTV footage. So this is both
Okay.
for public transport, and this is done, but not done for the densities that the Dadar railway station in Mumbai faces, or a
Mhm.
crowded sort of junction. So it's actually, so we've now helped sort of build this again, which allows you to then put in place a lot of this sort of responses. And then the final thing I do want to say, which is actually the biggest challenge in a way, is a lot of the public transport companies are in debt.
Yeah.
And if we are not able to help them think through, I mean, bus is the biggest mode of transport, especially for
Yeah.
a lot of people below sort of 15,000 rupees a month income kind of a thing. And if we are not able to help these public transport companies get out of debt, they're going to do strange things, like somebody's trying to sell fuel to make money. So because they are desperate now, and I think there are some systematic measures in actually helping public transport companies with a slightly longer term view of 10 years, making sure they have some finances assured, that they can systematically revive out of this whole thing, and then sort of with the use of technology, etc., which there was a lot of reluctance. So people didn't move to automatic fare collection for years for whatever reason, but the
Yeah.
pandemic is forcing that. And can we leverage these opportunities then to sort of thrive? So these are sort of three kinds of things that we have been very actively engaged in the last year. So I'll stop there, and happy to take more
Great.
questions.
Thanks, Madhav. Shrikant, of course, your reports and your studies have been, sort of benchmarks in their own way. So, in the last 1 year, how has Janagana been, given the fact that you have so much deep understanding of the urban ecosystems, how did you guys go about?
So we did undertake, similar to what Anindita and Madhav mentioned, we did partner with few governments, particularly in Bangalore with the Brihat Bangalore Mahanagar Palike and the government of Karnataka, on some decentralized platforms like ward deter committees, which is an ongoing effort. And we were also working very closely with the Housing and Urban Development Department, government of Odisha, through the last year and a bit on a variety of initiatives. But Sudipto, if I can focus on two you would say meta level changes that have happened, or realizations that have in some ways dawned or redawned, they are the following. One is that public health in India's cities
Yeah.
is as much or more a governance problem as it is a health problem. It's not that we didn't know this before, but I think COVID-19 pandemic served as a shocking reminder that public health, particularly primary healthcare, is in cities is as much a governance problem in its various dimensions. And therefore, Janagraha is now beginning to explore work at the intersection of public health and city governance, particularly focused on decentralization of primary healthcare, decentralization of governance of primary healthcare with deep community involvement. That's one track of work that we wish to explore and then eventually, hopefully, mainstream within our own organization. The second piece, which somewhat you could say undergirds the earlier point that I made, is the fact that there is a crying need for strengthening of public institutions and public systems in our cities.
Mhm.
And the lack of them does not impact the middle class and the upper middle class as much as it does the poor. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic in some sense has been impartial, but it's been far harsher on the urban poor. And I think the root cause of this is we have been trying to, take shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to fixing public systems and institutions. It is a long route to reforms in our cities. And I think the further we delay reforms to city governance in India, the more vulnerable we will be, the more vulnerable the urban poor in India's cities would be over the next couple of decades.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Like, what we saw was heartbreaking, in the first and the second waves. And really, our hearts go out to all those people who were affected by the breakdown, I would say. Viraj, interestingly, we saw the impact of your work very early in the pandemic, the e-pass, which your sort of organization has been, very actively thing. Could you take us through some of the, how did you guys go about, developing it, and for the fact that it was also deployed very fast across cities. I myself had used it during the pandemic while traveling from Haryana to Delhi and back and all those stuff. So take us through, if you could, in terms of what are the key takeaways from that experience.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, happy Independence Day to everybody and namaskar. I think this pandemic was very interesting for us. We're mainly a do tank. It made us think very deeply about what we're doing and what we care about. I think we were kind of happily building stuff for cities and service delivery, a national digital platform called Digit. And then the pandemic came and we started thinking, the things are burning around us. What do we do? And I guess that's when the first images of, people trying to reach their home for essentials, for their work, for essential services, and police doesn't know who can travel, who doesn't travel. We started working in March end. How do we repurpose the digital public goods that we've built to solve, like Shrikant said, it's a governance problem. Ultimately, it's not a law and order problem. It's a governance problem, right? That people don't know. The police doesn't know who can travel, who cannot travel. And is it a reliable certificate or kind of a permit that he or she has? So I think within 3 days, the first, and that's the advantage of digital public goods. They're accessible and they can work at national scale at speed. So within 3 days, the first Madhya Pradesh was live, and within 10 days we had 9 states live. And it was a collaboration of Samaj Sarkar. It was a great example of Samaj Sarkar because we had Ministry of Home, Ministry of Food. We had METI, we had FICCI, we had Hindustan Liver, PNG, of course iSpirit, and EGA Foundation in that. So I think in the first lockdown, within 3 months, almost more than 10 lakh journeys were kind of enabled through that. But I think then we started thinking, now the next phase is vaccination. How do you what are we uniquely placed to contribute? Obviously, CoWIN is a great platform, it works and everything. So that's where we look at credentialing and saying, how do you create reliable credentialing of vaccination so that people can go back to work, people can travel. And that's when we built DIVOC, which is digital infra for vaccination and authentication. And more than 50 crore certificates have been issued. It's basically CoWIN uses the DIVOC kind of the credentialing module to all the certificates that you see are issued by DIVOC. So that's another example of how you can, by using public digital goods, unlock, and do things at scale and speed. And now I think what we are working on is with a couple of countries like Philippines and Sri Lanka for them to use DIVOC as a part of their vaccination programs. So I think for us the main learning was, how do you repurpose and things at speed and scale? And second was access. I think access became a real issue because people could not go to the offices. So that's when we started working on some of the channels we hadn't explored before, stepping out of apps and portals to saying, if WhatsApp is the biggest channel, why can't we deliver service on WhatsApp? So today in Punjab, you can actually pay your bills, you can lodge complaints like you can on an app through a chatbot. And the interesting thing is, it's a great example of access. We talk of access various, there's a There are citizens and there are citizens, and there are cities and there are cities. There is Ludhiana, which is 2 million people, and there's Kurali, which is 30,000 people. And when we launched the WhatsApp, Kurali has a 30% take of a WhatsApp because everybody knows how to use WhatsApp there. Versus if you ask them to download an app, right? So I think it's been a very interesting journey for us to see how we can repurpose what we have done can be used in this public health and public governance crisis. And also, how do we create access, which is where we meet people where they are, rather than trying to say, okay, come to us on a portal or on an app.
Interesting. Viraj, I'm tempted to ask you this. Actually, I saved it for later. But the migration of the workers that we saw in the first phase, in the first wave, you think that could have been prevented by the e-pass somewhere? That could have been sort of. I know it's in hindsight, all of us are wiser, but.
I think it's a more deeper problem than a simple e-pass being able to solve it. I think it's a socioeconomic problem that all of us should, as individuals, also should reflect on. But obviously, MP used it very well when people are coming back. The path was made easier. But why did they have to leave is the first question to ask, right? They are not migrants. They work on our cities and they build our cities. So I think that's a more fundamental question for me. But yeah, it can definitely, make the journey back easier. But I don't think that's the real problem in my mind, at least.
Agree. I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this will lead to a lot of thinking and repurposing the way we use technology and the way you use our public policy. The think tanks and the instruments that we use. Do we have a? Okay. Should we now break for a audience poll now? And before moving to the second theme. Okay, here you go. How can we bring down inequality between people in urban settlements? That's the audience poll. I'll just repeat once more. How can we bring down inequality between people in urban settlements? So audiences, viewers, please feel free to share your views. We'll definitely, before the end of the session, we will post out the results. So let me move to the second theme now. The second theme is the lessons. Of course, we touched upon it slightly in the first session also. This is a bit more pointed. So here the lessons learned from the pandemic, and I'd like to start with Anindita first. In terms of say, Center for Policy Research, I was amazed to I was going through the report. It's a very interesting report where you went out during the pandemic, did a huge countrywide survey about the impact and captured the sort of the takeaways from there. Could you take us through, first of all, what did it take you to do it, and also some of the key takeaways from that?
Sure. Thank you. It has been a journey in itself working on that report, and various sector experts from livelihood, migration, public transport, public health actually came together to write this report up and kind of take back the learnings as we saw them. The idea of this report was to essentially assess the intersection between urban public policy planning and pandemics in adopting an interdisciplinary approach. And we went to 11 cities of different class size. As Viraj was mentioning, our city system is a system within itself where you have very large to very small cities, and you need very, very customized way of looking their problems in a different way. So across city sizes, we had gone to 11 cities, and we ended up interviewing about more than 150 key informants who were directly and indirectly impacted by the pandemic, from the policymaker to the citizen, the entire stakeholder segment that were interviewed. And there has been three key learnings. There has been many, and then bucketed into this big broad headers where which can help us, what would I say, internalize the findings most. And I take Shrikant's point that by the time we were ending this report, it seemed that most of the problems were actually tackled in some way or the other, but they were all quick fixes. They were all response to that problem at that time in that city. Yeah, somebody did a very good job on transport, someone did a very good job on reaching water sanitation at the doorstep. But these are not quick fix problems. These are systemic, these are structural, these are governance related problems. And that's why when the second wave hit us, we were again found unprepared or underprepared, if I may say that. And that tells us why these quick fixes will only help us respond better in a crisis situation, and that is very important. But unless we take it in the broader spectrum and framework to mainstream these learnings and take the learning to that next level for systemic governance, I think we'll fall far short every time we are hit with a new wave. And the three key learnings, just quickly to summarize, would be, one, first, that we bucketed as building urban resilience through integrated planning, and moving beyond static land use based planning and making it more dynamic with social, economic, and spatial planning, physical planning as the cornerstone of the planning mechanism. And I think we are far from there. That we need to achieve, and the work should start right now, right here. And the second that we kind of concluded as part of the report actually was this enabling legal reforms and revisit governance responsibilities across scale, right? The pandemic of 2020 were tackled by an epidemic act of 1897, and the disaster management act, more recent, in 2005. And it kind of opened to all of us thinking that, okay, do we need a new framework? Because both of these acts did not provide for the power that the local body or this very close to the ground institution should have got to manage the pandemic and introduce novelty and innovation. And the final one was attenuating informal and formal, this debate, this categorization and universalize access. As Viraj was saying, these people actually work, stay, contribute to building these cities, and you cannot say that you have a different standard or different benchmark for them. And how do you integrate them within the city fabric to make them what would I say, worthy full resident, and who has rights, powers, and can ask for accountability going forward, is what we kind of concluded through this. And by the time we ended this report in March, we really felt that, okay, everything has been done. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's in front of us that these quick fixes will not take us very far. So we need some structural and governance changes. And here is a benchmark of report which can take us think and do accordingly as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Aditya. Structural changes, governance changes, something that Shrikant has written extensively on, and I've been reading some of his articles. They are like very comprehensive. Shrikant, would you be able to take us through in terms of now what is the key governance structures in cities that need to change? Now let's talk in terms of taking it forward now. What needs to change in terms of governance, and is there something which is in the works? You are active in Bangalore. Is there something that's happening out there or in any part of the country where some thinking is going on? Because governance, we've seen clearly that governance structures are simply, need to change, and they need to now move on now.
Thanks, Sudipto. So there are two sets of important reforms and reorientation that we need in India with respect to governing our cities and towards more equitable cities. One is on recognizing the city as a unit of governance, like the country and the state, and having a single point of political accountability. Essentially, in simple English, that would mean strengthen the municipality, strengthen the mayor and the council. So if you do not make the municipality the government of the city, and if you do not make the mayor and the council together the point of political accountability for citizens of the city, I don't think we're going to solve the first mile governance challenge, whether it's with respect to public health and pandemics, or whether it's with respect to any other area of service delivery. And all of these public services and infrastructure are more important for the urban poor. Some of them matter to us equally, clean air, for example. But there are some others which the middle class and the upper middle class are able to procure through private means, which is not the case with the urban poor. So we really need to reimagine the municipality as a city government and establish the mayor and the council as being directly politically accountable to the citizens of the city. That's one important change. And along with that, you need to deepen governance, because many of our cities are very large. You spoke about Bangalore. Bangalore is more than 700 square kilometers in area, has 10,000 kilometers of roads, a population of more than 10 million people. It's a really large city. You can't even govern it with one elected council. Therefore, you need to take governance down to the ward level and also the sub-ward level. We've been advocating for the last 15 years that we need the equivalent of the Gram Sabha in the city at the polling booth level, called the area Sabha. But the tragic part of this is, I do not believe that even the pandemic has stirred up the political impulse towards decentralized urban governance yet. But this is very, very critical, not just for pandemic management and equity, but also for India's socio-economic future. So that's one important piece, and the beginning of that piece is to recognize the city as a place, as a unit of governance, and not just as a center for service delivery by disaggregated entities. That's one set of reforms. The second important set of reforms, which you could call state capacities, but in more specific terms, there are three areas where I think reforms are urgently needed. They can be initiated with urgency, but they cannot be completed with urgency. One is you really need better spatial planning and urban design in our cities. I'm no expert in this. Probably somebody like Madhav is a domain expert, but cities have a spatial dimension, physical dimension. We really need better technical capacities, better laws and implementation with respect to spatial planning and design. Secondly, we need capacities with respect to public finance management. It is now well established, though some parts of civil society and others are in denial, that India as a country does not have adequate capital to finance its own human development. The 15th Finance Commission report has clearly stated that India's general government revenues are not adequate to meet our human development needs, period. Which means we have a huge shortage of capital, which means two things. One is our cities need to be financially sustainable. They need enough money. Secondly, they also need to be financially accountable. The little money that you have has to be spent well. Today, we have a huge human resource problem with respect to public finance management as well. And not just human resource problem, also digital infrastructure is missing, which Viraj and eGov and others are building. The third piece is human resources in our cities are currently governed through outdated and totally arcane cadre and recruitment rules. We need to urgently fix cadre and recruitment rules or service rules of India's cities, so we have adequate number of skilled staff. This is a problem that very few people are talking about, but this is really the elephant in the room. If you don't have enough skilled people in our municipalities governing our cities, we are not going to be able to transform our public institutions and systems fast enough. And without that, the lives of the urban poor cannot achieve intergenerational mobility.
Excellent. In Bangalore, have you sort of taken any initiative? I mean, sitting there, is the state how responsible is the state government?
Okay, so we are taking effort. So we have this phrase in Janagraha called urgent patience, that a systems problem like cities has to be tackled with a lot of urgency and efforts, but incredible patience with results. So that's kind of summarizes our relationship and interactions with the government of Karnataka and the civic agencies in Bangalore. I do not believe at this point in time we can really hold up any large city in India as a model. Kerala, Odisha, and there are isolated examples in other parts of India as well. But at a state level, Kerala and Odisha probably are the states which are making strides in decentralized urban governance in different ways. Kerala, of course, has a long history of it over the last 20-25 years. They've married administrative decentralization with political decentralization, which is quite important. So to answer your question, Bangalore is certainly not a role model. We worked closely with the government on amendments to the BBMP bill 2020, etc. But there are some green shoots, nothing to write home about. We have a long distance to cover with respect to city governance reforms in India. Unfortunately, I can't give you, any positive news, or I can't give you a feel good on this, Sudipto. We are actually behind by at least 2 decades in the area of city governance reforms, and unless we start today, in the next 20 years, we won't fix this problem.
So that means there's opportunity, and you're the right person at the right place.
No, not just us. We need everybody on this panel, these organizations, plus many more to work together. But the first step has to be made by the government.
Absolutely. Madhav, I'd like to be a bit provocative to you in terms of, Mumbai had this image of maximum city, and now we're talking about equal city. So do you really, given the constraints of Mumbai, we all, been there, worked there, visited, given the constraints of Mumbai, you think Mumbai can ever become an equal city?
Thanks. So Sudipto, so just building on what Shrikant said, right? I mean, I think the idea of, what he said, the need for devolution of power, public finance, and state capacity, basically. So this is going to take us 15, 20 years. So, but in these 10, 15 years, we are going to spend $500 billion building infrastructure, right? And so as WRI, we're very clear, we want to influence this investment of 500 billion over the next 10 years to be as sustainable as possible, as environment friendly as possible. And so that's our focus, right? So, and just going, so then answering this question, so Mumbai is going to spend somewhere between 120 to 150,000 crores with the metro, roads. There's a big agenda on sort of flood management, greening, all of that. Now there are huge opportunities, right? Every rupee you spend on road, if you get your design right, you will have walking, much better designed walking, pedestrian safety, road safety, equity comes in, right? Whether you're doing the greening agenda, right? Today, if you see, we were just producing some data, and Dharavi is 6 degrees hotter than adjoining Matunga because there is no green cover there, right? And now, so every time, and heat is now becoming, we are getting to a point where heat is where you can't live your life as it is, right? So so again, this again, here, I mean, can they adopt the greening agenda? Can they? So every single dollar that is invested, there is a dividend opportunity that we can capture for sustainability, for both financial and long-term financial sustainability, as well as environment sustainability, as well, making sure that the design is for people who can be sort of included, right? So I think so there are opportunities. See, the hard question in Mumbai is housing, right? Anybody who's lived in Mumbai knows it's essentially not affordable, and I think Mumbai is losing out. I mean, the fact that the top 10 companies in India today are not in Bombay was simple answer. The people that the people that they want to attract cannot afford to live in Mumbai. So housing is a huge issue. Having said that, Mumbai actually transport is very equal, right? If you're a poor person, for 15 rupees you can travel 20 kilometers. And most cities, this is the big challenge. Transport and housing are the two things you need to balance and make them sort of affordable. So then there is this whole idea of spatial planning and urban design and all of that comes into play. But having said that, I think huge opportunity to do a lot of good things. Again, are we going to become an equal city? I think that's not going to happen very, very clearly. And I think whatever they can do, I mean, to to improve affordability of housing in Mumbai. And I think one of the key things that actually today, we think of, I think the whole idea of shared housing that is emerging, which is, with this sort of, housing for seniors, housing for students. I think this idea of shared housing, if we are able to enable, I think we can actually trigger a very unique Indian movement towards sort of affordable housing. Because I don't think we are going to be able to fix the market as it stands, both for land and for real estate, the way it stands. So it really needs a new paradigm that emerges where, people have small spaces that they live in, but then all of the other needs, like, even including kitchens and things, can be shared. So they're able to get a better quality of life through sort of more sort of the shared housing type of facility. So that is something that can be explored and can be sort of strategically promoted as a move to improve affordable housing in the city. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Madhav. Viraj, in terms of the success of the e-pass and the public infrastructure, do you think in terms of so what is the next sort of ideas you have in terms of making this public digital infrastructure part and parcel of the urban planning model? Is there some sort of engagement with the policy makers on that in terms of making it happen? And also, if I may add that, in terms of this question over digital haves and have-nots, so how does this public digital infrastructure, work when you have to meet that challenge of some people don't have access to digital, means? So how do you answer that?
Yeah. Well, thanks. Fascinating conversation. I think Madhav said some 5,000 crores, some number was there for building physical infra. I think we need to look at technology not as technology, because technology is a very market-driven term and it has a image of software clicking and doing stuff. I think we need to use term public digital infra because that's what really our cities need. Public digital infra which can actually, provide access both to all the actors, not just citizens, but also government needs public digital infra to do their jobs better, to have more reliable data. Social sector needs public digital infra to get information quickly and reliably, right? And actually amplify their impact. So I think unless we start looking at technology as public digital infra, which can actually be at scale and speed used by various actors to, amplify their impact, I think we'll always have this dichotomy that Flipkart knows everything, what is where, but my city doesn't know where I live, So it's like two different worlds we live in. And the same issues of access will remain, but ultimately access problems will be solved by community actors. Let's face it, there are people who are doing excellent work in communities, but how do you amplify their impact? If a Swiggy driver can know where he has to turn left and right and what's the nearest, this thing, a social worker should know to find a place very easily. It's not that hard, right? So I think that's a paradigm shift we need to make both as eGov, also our ecosystem, that this is not just about getting a bunch of applications in people's hand. That's the least of our problem. Actually, it is basically a systemic, underlying layer which all the actors can use, right? And sometimes I think I like to use the term that it is actually creator of reliable data. Whether you are a citizen, you know what is happening to your request, you put a building plan approval for approval, where did it fail, what was the reason, or you raised a complaint, or you are a municipal employee. I mean, capacity is an issue, right? But if you can take drudgery out of their work, and give them tools that anybody has today, right? That's so much easy. I mean, we did a survey in Andhra Pradesh, from 19 hours a week is saved just by using an inbox and simple workflow. And similarly, the city managers, we can keep saying, government is inefficient, but half the time they're collecting data. How many streetlights I have, how many people are there who don't have water and stuff like that. So I think this is a big shift we need to make. And plus, other thing I'm saying is digital infra in itself is not enough. Unless you have a vibrant ecosystem and you make the infra easily accessible, make it easy, don't make it hard. Make it easy. If I'm a social worker and I need to collect data, just give me something very easy I can use. If I'm an employee, don't ask me to go through the hoops of, going to a portal, downloading stuff. So I think this whole thing of how do you get market involved at a programmatic layer, not at an infra creation layer. So infra is created with standards, with equitable access, interoperability, right governance, but the market can play on top of it to run the programs. So I think those two things are very important: building a public digital infra and what we call a open digital ecosystem. And that thinking is there. There was a recent paper by MeitY on national open digital ecosystems, which Omidyar had kind of partnered with. So I think there's an increasing reliance that building point solutions to point problems is not scalable. Unless we create an underlying digital infra, it'll be very hard.
Well said. I think you just hit it on the thing. I think that fascination with technology also has to, somewhere has to end. It's end of the day. It's all about how you use technology. What does it do to you, and what does it, how you're able to make the most out of it. So somewhere I think that fascination and that making it that that has to sort of end somewhere. If we have a poll, should we go for the audience questions now? And just to, if we have any audience questions. Okay. Okay. One question is, how can we have good planner, designer, urban finance economists joining municipalities and reducing dependency on consulting? So, Shrikant, would you like to take a stab at it? Like, how do we sort of encourage people to join municipalities? In terms of and who are sort of technologically savvy, much more, who are able to take the agenda forward in terms of using technology, marrying technology with the social purpose.
Right. So I have typed my response in the chat box. I'll just repeat it and elaborate on it a bit. So in the medium to long term, there are two things which need to be done. One is that urban planning is to be devolved to the municipality, but it's not going to happen in the short to medium term. It's at least going to take the medium term, if not more realistically, the long term. Secondly, we need, like I said earlier, we need reforms to cadre and recruitment rules, which redefines human resource policies for our municipalities. In the short to medium term, and also in the long term, I'd add one thing, which is today the fiscal space available to hire talent at market salaries is non-existent. Most municipalities in India, do not have enough operating surplus to incur salary costs, which means their own revenues are not sufficient to pay salaries. They are dependent on the state governments or union governments for paying salaries, which means over the medium to long term, they need to build fiscal space to attract market talent. So these are the three things to be done in the medium to long term. But however, in the short to medium term, what can definitely be done and should be done is to create shared capacities across cities, either at the state level or at a cluster level. So we had advocated for municipal shared services with the 15th Finance Commission, and they've allocated 450 crores for pilot projects around it. I do not believe India cities today have the ability to create these kind of technical capacities city by city. We will have to necessarily go, in the case of large cities, for a clustered approach, and in the case of medium and small size cities, for a state level shared services kind of approach, without undermining the authority of elected councils, which means accountability of these shared services should be to the elected council of the city and through service level agreements and so on.
Interesting. In terms of, say, we've seen some degree of that in Mumbai, for example. Madhav, if you could, we saw that during the pandemic, there were a lot of even the Mumbai model of how the the vaccination and also the identifying the patients, and that was being replicated in other places also. You think there's a lesson out there? Because I think that your councillors, your municipalities did a pretty good job, and which was being talked about.
No, I mean, I think one of the things we have to recognize is Mumbai has a lot of capacity at the ward and at sort of just in terms of number of employees, that a Mumbai Municipal Corporation has, the number of engineers it hires, the number of ward officers it has. So purely in terms of capacity, it is one of the best in the country, right? So I think if we are able to create that kind of capacity and ensure that the people we hire have the have the right sort of skills and incentives to do things, I think I think that's essentially what is required. I think one point I want to do make is, I think in the short term, I think one of the things that could be explored, and it is sort of building on this shared resources that Shrikant was saying, is a lot of times there was these ideas of what was called project preparation facilities, right? So you create certain groups of expertise at the state level or even at the national level around certain topics, right? Whether it is spatial urban planning, or do you need deep expertise on a certain type of waste management. So you create 5-6 people, you find a way, and then those people are available for officials, elected officials all over the country to be able to. So if we create like these, whatever 30 specialities, and if we create some sort of facilities or little programs, and we can figure out the financing for it, at least in the short term, you can actually build technical capacity that is then required more systematically while you go through this whole transition of sorting out your finances and then being able to hire the right type of people. Yeah. So,
Interesting. Let us move to the final session, final theme of the day. And this is basically a bit of a rapid fire, if we can try and do that. In terms of, say, if each one of you could take a stab at one or two things that you feel that needs to be done to make the cities equal, how and who, like, sort of, if you could just sort of course you have answered quite a few of that in your this thing, but this is more of a, I would say, a takeaway for our audiences in terms of you know what is the thing that in your priority, one or two things, who does it, and should we go about it. We can start with Anandita first.
Yeah. So, I don't know whether it will qualify as a rapid fire, but I think we need an approach that is more equitable than what we are following. So it's not about what to do, how to do, who to do. It's about this recognizing this journey as towards equitable, inclusive, and sustainable cities, as we committed ourselves to the Sustainable Development Goals and New Urban Agenda. We have to take this as a journey together, which needs to be enjoyed through the path and not at the goal. Let's not wait that when we have the capacity, when we have the influence, and so that's the key takeaway for me from this conversation. And I think it's a process of small reforms at various scales, social, economic, governance, at various scales, and spatial, and to keep the city in track, and keep these pockets in track of achieving that trajectory. It has to be a trajectory which is well chart out, where we are reaching towards being equitable, and it's not a plethora of it's a plethora of reform rather than a plethora of solutions that we have to address to what, if at all we want to reach there. And keeping poor at the center of of these of this journey itself, where we at each level, if we can remind ourselves, are we leaving someone behind? Can we take them along and then chart the journey? It's same for digital infrastructure. It's always for data, using that data for governance, more or welfare than surveillance. The smart city war rooms are a great example through this COVID-19, which kind of coming up for these smart cities, but then others were lagging far behind in that reform. So how do we bring that on board, bring them to the same level and keep that connect going, where these small little reforms at various levels can take us to that, place us in that orbit of achieving city which are more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive, is something I just want to leave with that thought. Thanks so much.
So basically, you're saying that the journey becomes the destination.
Yes, yes, and unless we take the journey as the most important part of reaching the goal, these target based systems always will leave some behind, and will reach the target, and then you'll realize, oh, then there are some people are left behind. So if you take that as a journey, then this process kind of continues, and we sustain that process is what I would like to leave thinking from this conversation.
Shrikant, in terms of, you spoke about the regulatory, and in terms of the legal changes, also regulatory legal changes. Would you like to point out one or two things from the legal regulatory, or the any change in laws that?
Yeah, absolutely. So need to look at the city as a place. Need to look at the city as a unit of governance and of the economy. Therefore, don't treat problems of cities as problems of infrastructure and service delivery. Solve for them by solving for governance systems and citizenship. So solve for it by solving for democracy in the city. Towards that end, the union government will have to amend the 74th Constitution Amendment and make municipalities genuine local self-governments. We should not be idealistic in believing that that objective can be achieved overnight, but we have to clearly mark out that destination and ensure that there is progressive, there is progress that is made towards that destination. At the union level, we also need greater coherence in articulating more regional governance. Sometimes the distinction between, or the binary between urban and rural is artificial. We need ministries and departments that focus on local self-governments and communities rather than just on urban and rural infrastructure and urban infrastructure. So that reimagination needs to happen, and creating of shared capacities at the union level is important. At the state level, we need municipal acts to be amended to achieve all of these. Across planning, finances, empowerment of municipalities, elected mayors and councils, and citizen participation, empowering ward committees, area sabhas, and so on. And the locus of action really is the state government. Irrespective of whether the union government amends the 74th Constitution Amendment or not, the future of India's cities lie with state governments. Because as per the constitutional scheme, local governments in India are a state subject. There needs to be collective action, particularly powered by philanthropy and civil society, in working with state governments to reform city governance in India's cities and deepen democracy at the ward level and sub-ward level. The three catalytic interventions, I believe, will work, rather than just the discourse on decentralization, could be around health and wellness of citizens, around climate change, around water and sanitation, and most importantly, around gender equality. Because let us not forget that the local governments are the only level of government where we have representation of women in the elected body between 33 to 50% in every city in India. Therefore, empowering elected women councillors could be a catalyst of change which straddles all of these catalysts themselves, like health and wellness of citizens, climate change, and water and sanitation. These issues are global challenges. They will be big issues in the 21st century. We have not solved them. Some issues like gender equality we haven't solved for millennia. Some other challenges have persisted for decades or centuries. But the locus of action for all of these is local collective action. And that is the big opportunity we have. And that is what really holds out hope for people like us at Janaagraha. Thank you.
Thanks, Shrikant. Madhav, what would be your wish list be in terms of making the city equal? Of course, I know it's a Pyrrhic sort of destination.
No, like I said, I mean, I think it is really right now in the short term, really next 10 years, the big, this is unprecedented. India is never going to spend this kind of money again on infrastructure, right? So, So this 500 billion to 1 trillion that we will spend in the next 15 years, how do we make it? How do we make sure that by design it is more inclusive? How do we capture the dividend for equity? For is where we are very much focused. And I think the other huge issue, I think, is city governments, is jobs. I mean, today citizens don't have jobs that actually, I mean, there's lots of jobs which pay you 15,000 rupees a month, right? But
Yeah.
to go from 15,000 rupees to 50,000 rupees a month, city governments are also not doing anything about it. So, is there a way for city governments to start? How do we empower city governments to start thinking about how they can create jobs where people can sort of actually, and I'm not again sort of, so I think this is a big other dimension that actually city governments need to start thinking actively about, because that's how they will sort of strengthen their economies and things like that. And so I think that's, I mean, this is adding to what everyone has said. I think
Absolutely.
just one other point. Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Viraj, finally, we'd like to close with you in terms of, so what's the next on your agenda? And
Yeah. Go on. Sorry, Sudhir.
yeah, if you could take us through what's next on your agenda and what would be your wish list be in terms of that one change that you feel that from this whole takeaway from the COVID pandemic situation.
Yeah. No, I think whichever way you cut it, whether it's health, wellness, climate change, building the city infra, they're all underpinned or they're all hampered by lack of good governance. So I think one of the things that we kind of are very, as Eager Foundation is saying, by 2025, all 4,400 urban local bodies in India should have a governance infra or digital infra to deliver services in a more equitable, more transparent, and more predictable manner, have financial accountability, have data on their financial sustainability, and have the ability to build solutions which are locally relevant. I think that's very important. I think you cannot sit in Bangalore and decide what is relevant for Bhubaneswar or Asansol or Guwahati, right? So I think you need to distribute the ability to solve. So I think the real success will be, when and it's already happening. People are building their own solutions, but communities needs to they understand their problems best, and we need to empower the communities through data, through tools to build their own solution. Secondly, I think it's very important that we design, and this is true for us sitting in Bangalore, and I mean, very honest. I think there's a design sensibility which is very Bangalore specific, and is kind of influenced by San Francisco and I talk about technology. I think we need to find a design ethos which works for India, which works for Indians, which works for next 500 million, and that's a very big kind of a internal kind of a reorientation that we have to do. And thirdly, I think I cannot overemphasize the importance of Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar working at scale together, collaborating, really collaborating, right? I think we hear a lot about, Bazaar does this and Sarkar does that. But I think what open, interoperable, observable digital infra does is gives a trusted environment to people to transact. So cost of coordination goes down. We saw in financial services how it happened. So I think my dream is that one day, a 16-year-old girl in Asansol, in her civics class, she brings up from the local data, has the list of all the local civic issues and brings it to the class and say, this is what is happening in my city. That'll be really awesome. Thank you.
Great. That's a great a dream to sort of work towards, I would say. Great. Thank you, all the panelists, and we are almost close to our time. And I really like to thank all the panelists for the time and the fact that of course, I'd like to also apologize to all of you for the glitch, and I was the only person that we were not able to sort of, come sort of on a visually not there. But again, I think something in the rush of things, I forgot to also this thing that, I needed to thank first of all, the organizers, and Omidyar and the Nudge Foundation have done an excellent job. In the last couple of days, the level of discussion and the sort of the involvement and was awesome. And I think this is something we need to, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of takeaways from this discussion, and hopefully some policymakers would get influenced by this, and we're going to see much more engagement with the social civic society. And I wish you all the best to all of you, and frankly, again, wish you a very happy Independence Day. I'd like to close the session now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Jai
you.
Hind. Bye.
Jai Hind.
Thank you.
you.